All right, have you ever noticed that nothing good in life happens by drifting? Right? Like I'll give you a great example. Nobody wakes up shredded one morning because they accidentally drove past a gym several times, right? Like that, it just doesn't work that way. I've been in a lot of gyms over the years, and hands down, one of my favorite memories, one of my favorite places to have been a part of was a CrossFit gym in Twinsburg, Ohio. It was awesome. It was a great culture. There were great people that was there. I became really good friends with the owner. But one of the things that I loved the most was every morning when I would show up, there was a plan. Like I knew what we were going to do. You showed up, you knew exactly what was coming, and you just get after it, right? And it was a tight window. Classes were usually like no more than an hour and 15 minutes, so an hour and 15 minutes, and it was pretty intense. There wasn't much time for standing around and chit-chatting. Now, fast forward to now, right? And just bear with me. I'm working out at a more traditional gym, like the kind with machines and mirrors and about 8,700 treadmills. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just different than what I was doing in Ohio. I'm trying to save a little bit on budget, and so now I'm like working on doing my own programming, so I show up and I have a plan. When you walk into a gym, you can tell pretty quickly who has a plan and who's just drifting. Right, the other morning, I was heading out, and I walked past 9 people, all on the treadmill, and 6 of them had their heads buried in their phone, and they were walking at a pace that a toddler could have outpaced them on, right? The other morning, I walked past 9 people hanging out on the floor, not lifting, just chit-chatting with one another. Now, to be fair, maybe they crushed it after I left. I hope so. But it hit me how easy it is to show up somewhere that's meant for training and just drift. Right? Just this last week, I was going in and all the squat racks were taken. And so I went to one of these weird cable machines where you could load up weights on the side. And the other thing that I've noticed is nobody puts their weights back when they're done. Right? It's not a big deal. But it makes it difficult to sometimes tell if a machine is still being used or not, right? If they've just been abandoned mid-set by the ghost of workouts past or something, I don't know. And so I was going to this one machine, and there were 2 machines that were here, and there was one guy standing between this machine and another machine talking to another guy on the leg press machine. And I've got a small window before I've got to get back home and got to go through the morning routine, get everybody out the doors. And so I asked him, I said, "Hey man, are you on either of these machines?" And he looks back at me, dead serious, as if completely annoyed and offended by my question, and went, "Yeah, I'm on this one." And so I fired back, "Could have fooled me with all that jibber-jabbering you're doing." I'm just kidding. He was a big dude, and I was not ready to get beat up at 5:30 in the morning at a cable gym. But the funny part, though, is the very next morning, I was sitting on a machine, and I was scrolling Facebook between 2 sets, and that same exact guy came up and said to me, so yeah, guilty, right? Because what happens, right, when there's no focus, is it's easy for us to drift. There's no plan, right? Sometimes you don't even notice that you are drifting until someone comes and taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, are you actually doing this thing?" And so what we know, and this is true in gym life and it's true in real life, is that you don't drift into strength, right? You train into it, right? You don't just naturally drift into strength. You have to choose to train into it. And here's where this gets real for us, is most of us don't crash our lives on purpose. What happens is we tend to drift slowly. Because the truth is, we all drift. Nobody wakes up and says, "You know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to slowly be less intentional with my faith, my life, my relationships." But it happens. And if you hear that and you think "Yep, that's me," I want you to hear this up front, and it's really important, is when that happens, Jesus isn't standing there with his arms crossed saying "Hey man, get back to work," right? God isn't surprised by our drift. In fact, God actually moves towards drifters. And the good news, what we're talking about today, the good news of Jesus isn't try harder and maybe God will be impressed with you. The good news is that Jesus meets us, meets you in the drift, and He offers us a better way. That's the good news. And He offers us help because we drift in all kinds of things. We drift in our health, we drift in our marriages, we drift in our friendships, our finances, we drift in our faith, right? And not because we stop believing, but because we simply stop training. And drift sounds harmless until you wake up somewhere that you never thought that you would go, somewhere that you never intended to be. And training sounds difficult until you realize that it's the only way that you actually get where you want to be. Right? If you've ever opened up your banking app and you saw the balance and you thought like, oh crap, someone compromised my account, and you do the quick scroll only to realize, nope, it was all you. But you know what drifting feels like. If you've ever walked into your garage or down into your basement or the junk drawer and thought, how in the world did this get that bad? That's drifting. Right? Nobody planned it. Nobody scheduled trash explosion on the calendar. But it just happened, one decision at a time. And I think drifting tends to happen for a couple different reasons. Number one, I think we feel overwhelmed, right? Life is loud. You got work, bills, kids, text, that one group chat that you wish would die and it just wouldn't. And we know it, but we're not focused on the things that we want to focus on, but we're just focused on surviving our schedules. And even if we're doing that, even if we are surviving our schedules, I think we drift because we feel underprepared for the things that we have to handle. Parenting, marriage, leadership at work, running a business. And then you throw faith into the mix, and it's like, man, like where does this even fit? Where do I even begin? Like, we don't know what we're doing half the time, so we just make it up as we go. In the few moments of quiet that we do happen to find, we drift because comfort's easier than commitment. Right? We know that we should use some space, or we should create and protect some space to slow down and pray and check in with God. But if we're honest, it's easier to just scroll or binge or something or do literally anything that feels like a break where we could catch our breath. And somewhere in there, I think what happens is we start confusing activity with growth. We're volunteering, attending, doing, signing up for things, but motion isn't the same as maturity. We can be really busy doing things, doing church things, doing life things, and still not getting where we want to go. And on top of that, right, and so this is like with faith, and this one probably hits our students more so maybe than our adults, but for some of you in middle or high school, it's not that you hate God, it's just that faith feels like a later thing, right? Like a retirement plan or something. Like, you know it matters, it just doesn't matter today. It's not rebellion, it's autopilot. It's the idea of like, someday I will figure this out, someday I'll need to trust Jesus, but right now, I don't really have anything to trust Him with. And so you drift. It's not rejection, it's just not yet. But listen, I want 6th through 12th graders, our students are always in the room with us. I want you to hear this, is you have a ton to add to our church. You're not just the future of the church, you're part of the church right now. And so if you call Anthology your church home, right, we'd love for nothing more than for you to jump on a serving team or to start coming to our student group. Our next student group is December 3rd, and we'd love for you to do that and be part of that with us. Here's where all of this comes together for all of us, though, because here's the problem, is when we stack all of those things together, the noise, the pressure, the comfort, the busyness, we drift. And the scariest part about it is, usually we don't even feel it happening until you look up one day and realize that you've been showing up, but you haven't been training. And we get this in every other part of life. Relationships take work, skills take practice, muscles take reps, but somehow, spiritually, sometimes we can drift into this thinking of just, one day I'll be strong, and if I hang around long enough, we'll figure it out. But strength doesn't come from drifting. Strength comes from training. And that's what we're looking at today in our next part of this series, Anchored, where we have been going through this letter, 1 Timothy in our Bibles. A guy named Paul writes to a young pastor named Timothy who's trying to lead a church in the middle of chaos. And he gives Timothy a clear, no-fluff training plan for what it looks like to actually follow Jesus when life is loud. And so Paul says this in 1 Timothy, starting in verse 7. He says, look, do not waste time arguing over godless ideas and old wives' tales. Instead, train yourself to be godly. Look what he says here. He says, physical training is good, but training for godliness is much better, promising benefits in this life and in the life to come. And so here's the big idea for today. Like, if you remember nothing else, this is what I want you to remember, is that you don't drift into strength, you train into it. And what I love about when Paul's handing this off here, Paul doesn't start with some big mystical metaphor. He starts with a gym metaphor. Now, honestly, this is one of the reasons why we wanted to start a church like this. It's like, so often in church, I think we can accidentally, and I'm not saying it's all bad, sometimes we end up saying things that sound really spiritual, using church words and phrases that you've probably heard before, but they don't really connect, or at least they didn't connect for me. And so Paul here is taking a page out of Jesus' book, I think, and he does the opposite. He uses something we already understand, and he says, let me show you what this has to do with God. And so even if you don't feel like you know a bunch of spiritual things, right, we do know what it is like to train. Right, you've probably played sports where you've had to practice. Right, you've taken a test where you've had to practice and prepare for that test. You have had something where you have put work in because you wanted to do well at it. And Paul is basically saying, look, that part of life that's no different, that is especially true spiritually. And so Paul literally says, train yourself to be godly. That's what verse 7 is all about. And before we geek out for a second on what that word is, train, I want to be really clear on this. Paul isn't saying, train so that God will be impressed with you. Because the reality is, because of Jesus, because of what God did through Jesus on the cross, there is nothing we could do to earn God's love. At the cross, Jesus took you seriously enough to die for you so that we could be forgiven and have a good relationship with God. The love and acceptance part of your relationship with God, that is settled. And so when Paul says, train yourself to be godly, he's not talking about becoming super religious or buttoned up. By godliness, he's talking about real life strength with God. Right? Becoming the kind of person whose life actually holds up under pressure because God is shaping you from the inside out. And so what's really fun, the Greek word, because this part of the Bible was originally written in Greek, it was like the trade language of the day. The word that Paul uses there for train is this word gymnazo, right? It's the same root where we get our word gymnasium from. And it's like Paul is saying, hey, Timothy, don't just believe in God, put on some spiritual muscle, right? Don't just admire Jesus, train your life to match His. And so one of the things we had to do as we were dreaming about starting this church and what it would look like, I was part of a cohort where we met every Wednesday on a Zoom call from 9 in the morning until 3:30 in the afternoon. And we were supposed to spend time, they'd give us homework, and we were supposed to spend time dreaming about what it would look like to start this church, and if people were a part of the church with us, what it would look like one day when they left the church or after they had been here for a while. And so part of that was coming up with, what do you want a mature, we throw this word around in church, disciple, student of Jesus to look like? Like, what would it look like if someone came and spent time at Anthology? What would it look like for them to be a mature student of Jesus? And this was the definition that I came up with. A mature student is someone who trains to match their life to the rhythms and teachings of Jesus. I mean, the idea is I don't want us just to be a bunch of people that know a lot about Jesus. I don't want us to be like people that just show up at church a lot. I want us to be people where we train our actual life, our schedules, our habits, our decisions, our relationships to match Jesus'. And what I think has been my experience, what happens when we do that is we begin to have more love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control as a part of our lives. And all of those things are things that we want to be part of our lives. And so Paul goes from verse 7 into verse 8, and he says this: physical training is good, but training for godliness is much better, because notice what he says: promising benefits in this life and in the life to come. So in other words, yeah, working out is good, but it's temporary. Training with God doesn't live in a spiritual corner just off to the side somewhere. It shows up in other places, right? It shows up in our temper at home. It shows up in how we handle our finances. It shows up in how you treat people when you're stressed, when they wrong you. Right? It shows up in that anger. It shows up in all those different places. In other words, this actually helps you live better now, not just someday. And sometimes we focus on just the someday thing. But he's also saying this is better for right now. And so if you only train your body but never train your soul, Paul says you're strong in one area, and it's probably the area that matters least. And you're weak in the areas that matter most. It's like the guy in the gym who's all about arm day and never about leg day, right? He's got arms that look like redwood trunks, but you'd never trust the guy to carry a couch up the stairs, right? He's strong in one area, but it's not a strength that can actually carry him. And Paul's saying the same thing can happen to us spiritually. We can get really strong in the wrong areas where we could flex in public but still collapse under the weight where it actually matters. And so that's the heart behind what Paul is writing here, is that we don't drift into strength, we train into it. And what I love is Paul's not writing to shame Timothy. He's writing to encourage him and to invite him into a plan. Because training assumes a plan, not just a feeling. Right? Training assumes movement, not perfection. Training says, I'm not there yet, but I am trying. I am showing up and giving it my best shot. And so I wanted to ask, so what does that look like for us? How do we actually go out of here from week to week and actually train? Right? What would it look like to train to match our lives to the rhythms and teachings to Jesus? And that's what Paul starts to unpack next. He says in verse 11, he says, teach these things and insist that everyone learn them. Don't let anyone think less of you because you're young. Be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, your purity. Until I get there, focus on reading the scriptures to the church, encouraging the believers, and teaching them. And so here's where Paul gets really practical. Verse 12 gets quoted all the time around youth conferences, right? And it's great for students. But Paul wasn't just writing this to Timothy as a teenager, right? Timothy actually is likely in his 30s when Paul writes this to him. And so Paul's point wasn't about age, it was about example. And he's saying, if you want to train for godliness, start small. Start where you are. Start with consistency. Set an example, not by preaching louder, but by living differently. You don't have to be impressive, you just have to be intentional. Because real training doesn't happen in the big moments, it happens in the small reps. Right? Nobody shows up to the gym for the very first time and throws 300 pounds their first day on the bench press. You build to that by showing up, doing work, and stacking small reps over time. And spiritually, it's the same exact way. We want big faith, faith that stands up when life gets difficult, but that kind of faith that isn't built in a crisis, it's built in consistency. And so Paul tells Timothy in verse 15, he says this, give your complete attention to these matters. Throw yourself into your tasks so that everyone will see your progress. Keep a close watch on how you live and on your teaching. Stay true to what is right for the sake of your own salvation and the salvation of those who hear you. In other words, It's going to take work, and progress takes time. But if you keep at it, people will see your growth. And I love that Paul doesn't say, there in the verse, he doesn't say, so everyone will see your perfection. What does he say? He says, so that everyone will see your progress, so that they will see that your story is changing. And some of you, one of the things that I have loved doing is over these last couple weeks, you have reached out through your connection card saying, hey, let's get together for coffee. And when we follow up, you say, hey, let's set up a coffee. And I get to sit down and I get to hear your story. And I love that so many of your stories are like, man, I gave up on church a long time ago. Or, man, I've never been to church. And I just thought, I thought there was something more to my story. And so I got your postcard, I saw your dumb social media ads, and I thought, I'll show up. And you're wondering, right, like, is this even making a difference? You feel like maybe no one notices, but Paul is saying that they will, that they do, that people see your progress, not your perfection. And so my encouragement to you is to keep going. Right? It's not about being the finished product, right, but it's about being faithful in the process. And that's what godly training looks like, small reps of obedience that build spiritual strength over time. And so we do things like show up when we don't want to. We pray when we don't feel like it. Serve and honor someone when they don't notice. You forgive before they ask for forgiveness. You practice gratitude when it would be easier to complain. Those are reps that build endurance. And if you can manage this week just one small rep, one honest prayer, one tough apology, or one text to a friend, that's movement. Don't despise those small reps. As I was studying this, I thought, like, I want to give, this still feels kind of like unclear. And so I was like, let's try and come up with something so we could give some like handlebars to this, right? So we could kind of like, what are we talking about here? What does this actually look like? And as I was studying this, I started building out this whole section that would be like a training plan for spiritual growth. And about halfway through writing it, I realized, like, man, we would be here till like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Like, this is too much for one message. But I still wanted to give something practical, something that you can actually grab onto and work with this week. And so I turned it into this little resource that you could use as a devotional at home this week. If you take your phone and you tap that dot on the seat in front of you, it will take you to our Church Center app. And there's a link for this thing. I don't know what to call it other than a training loop, a training cycle. And there's nothing sacred or fancy about it. It's just a simple rhythm that has helped me stay intentional with my own following Jesus. And so I thought, like, let's just turn this into something, think of it as like a training plan for your soul, something to help you show up to a spiritual gym and plan instead of just with good intentions. And so if you want that resource, you can find that there. You can download the PDF from our website, and you can walk through it at your own pace. But just to give you a taste of what it actually looks like, I want to tell you something that happened recently with my son, Dalton. Recently, my two youngest, Berkeley, my youngest daughter, and Dalton, our youngest child, they started doing jiu-jitsu about 6 weeks ago. And the first week was rough, man. The first week was rough. Dalton was brand new to the mat other than wrestling with dad, which, like, wrestling with dad at home is no holds bar. Like, hey, we're just out there having fun. I've never done anything like jiu-jitsu or anything like that. And they were out there on the mat, and they were learning this thing called closed guard escape. And basically, you're like down on the mat, your partner is on his back, and he's got his feet wrapped around you, and he's got his ankles locked. And what you have to do, what Dalton had to do, is he had to escape out of closed guard, and then his goal is to get chest to chest without the other partner's hands, like, in the way. And so Dalton's going, and he actually escapes from closed guard, which is great, but his partner then, like, starts to roll over on his side and get up, and Dalton, without missing a beat, goes full WWE mode and does this crossbody, ah! And he yelled, ah! And he body slammed the guy from across the mat. Not in the curriculum, right? And the best part is, Dalton had no idea that he was wrong. He just thought, this is awesome! You know, I got body slamming people. And his coach came, he pulled him aside, and he gave him a little bit of correction. And instead of getting defensive or embarrassed about it, Dalton just took it. And he stayed with it. And a couple weeks later, actually just this past Thursday, he nailed it. No belly flop, no chaos, no yelling. So it was less entertaining for me, but it was smooth, controlled, confident movement. That's what practice does. It's right, you don't just learn what to do, but you start becoming the kind of person who can do it naturally. And that's what Paul's talking about when he says in verse 15 to give your complete attention to these matters. Throw yourself into the tasks. Right, there's a joke somewhere hidden in there about Dalton crossbody checking that guy. But Paul is reinforcing what we suspect to know to be true, is that faith isn't built in these big moments, it's built in the little ones that you do on repeat. Practice is how you train your reactions before life tests them. It's how you learn to forgive when you've been wronged and before they say that they're sorry. It's how you learn to pray when you're stressed, to love when you would rather avoid, to obey even when you don't understand. Because in the moment of pressure, right, and we know this, you don't rise to your intentions. What do? You fall to your level of training. And this kind of training doesn't just apply to your prayer life or your relationship. It applies to every part of following Jesus. Right? So for some of us, training might look like actually setting aside a few minutes each morning to read and reflect instead of going straight to our phones. For others, training might be deciding to have that difficult conversation that you've been avoiding, to practice forgiveness instead of holding on to bitterness. Maybe it's carving out time this week to serve someone quietly with no recognition, just because that's what Jesus would do. And for some of us, one of the biggest areas where we drift instead of train is our finances. We want to be generous and we want to live at peace when it comes to that, but we've never really trained in that area. We just kind of hoped somehow it would all work out. Now, one of the things that we're doing at the turn of the year is there's a class by a guy named Dave Ramsey. It's called Financial Peace University. And the church actually really has like nothing to do with this other than two people who are members of our church, Jared and Heidi McNeely, want to teach this class. They've taught this class many times before. It's going to meet on Sunday nights starting in January. And if in our Church Center app, you can actually go and you can find more details. You can even register through a link that's in the app when you tap the dot in the seat in front of you. But what this is just a simple, practical way to start training for financial freedom, to get a plan, to build consistency, and learn how to handle money in a way that actually honors God and brings peace into your finances. And so if that's something you're interested in, it's a group that will be starting in January. It'll be a great way to help you find some peace there and also build some community within this church. Because all of these things take practice. All of this is showing up with consistency. And it's not just about what you do, but it's about who you're becoming. And so when Paul tells Timothy to train for godliness, he's not talking about religious busy work. He's talking about character that's being formed, integrity that can carry weight, right? Where there are benefits in this life and the life to come. You see, here's the truth, is that you can have talent without integrity, but it won't hold. You can build influence without integrity, but it won't last. And training for godliness means letting Jesus shape who you are beneath what everyone else sees. And so in everyday, normal language, this just means you pick one real area of your life and you actually do something different this week because of Jesus. And you give this a go. And my experience has been that you will begin to have more of those things: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, peace in your life. And I know that these are things that we want more of. And so this is where this stops being about the guy on the treadmill and it starts being about us. Integrity matters because it shows God is doing real work under the surface, not because you finally pulled it off on your own. And that's why Paul wraps up this whole section with verse 16 by saying, keep a close watch on how you live and on your teaching. Stay true to what is right for the sake of your own salvation and the salvation of those who hear you. And when Paul uses this word salvation here, he's not talking about checking a box or saying the right words. He's talking about your actual real life relationship with God, the real, lived out condition of your faith. And when he talks about the salvation of those who hear you, he's talking about the people who are quietly paying attention to your story. Right? The kid in the back seat who knows how you talk when you leave this place. The coworker who knows that you go to church and wonders, does it even actually make a difference? The friend who's on the fence about God and watching how you handle pressure in your story. And the goal of sharing that with you isn't to make you paranoid. It's not to weigh you down. It's not, you better be perfect or you'll ruin it. It's an invitation to wake up to the reality that your story doesn't just matter to you. It matters for what others see in you. And someone is either borrowing courage or cynicism from the way you live, from how you live out your story. And what I want to do with this message is just give you permission to try. One of my friends is, there was a guy, I try really hard to not let people know I'm a minister. Just to be frank with you, people get weird when they find out you're a minister, right? They just feel like they can't be themselves. So I was going to that CrossFit gym in Ohio, and I was trying to not let everybody know I was a minister. And then the owner of the gym showed up at church one Sunday, and he started every class by inviting people to come to church with him because I was the pastor, So there went that. But I was lifting with this guy, and I'd been lifting with him for a while, and all of a sudden our conversations took a spiritual turn. And I found out that he was a new dad, and his daughter was getting ready to turn about a year old. And he said, Curtis, I'd really like to pray with my daughter. Do you think I can pray with my daughter? I was like, well, yeah, you can pray with your daughter. He's like, but I don't know how. I said, well, you just talk to God about things that matter to you and matter to her. And he goes, that's it? I was like, yeah, that's it. And he goes home, and he gave it a shot. And what I found out when I asked him, hey, why? He's like, I just needed permission to try, honestly. And now, I just found out last week that he is actually a volunteer. He is the youth leader at the program at the church that he was not going to at the time we had that conversation. And so my point with that is your story matters, not just for you, but what others see in you. And all of this is just permission to try. You have permission to try. This is an invitation to stop hoping that life magically improves, and an invitation to start training, not to impress God, but to actually know Him. Because there is a God who loves you deeply, who wants good for you, and who meets you in the trying. Because none of this happens in drifting. It happens by showing up and trusting that God's grace is big enough to meet you right where you are. You pray with me. God, we love you. God, we've talked about a lot this morning, and God, this is where rubber meets the road, and this can feel like such a, God, I know what it looks like to show up at a gym. Hey, I got to lift these weights, I got to do this thing, and God, I got to, it shows up, it's different to show up on a job site. It's like, I got to build this wall, and at the end of the day, whether or not you built the wall, but God, running after you can feel mystical. So God, would you help us know what it looks like to train our lives to match the rhythms and teachings of Jesus? God, would you help us to honor you with the things that we do and say? And God, would you help us as we jump into reading your Bible and understanding what that looks like to live it out in our lives? And God, would you surround us with good, godly people to help us run in the same direction? Give us friends that will love and encourage us to run after you. God, all of this comes back. God, thank you that we don't have to nail it. God, that because of what you did through Jesus, God, it doesn't matter whether we nail this or not, God, because we are placing our complete trust in what Jesus did for us on the cross. Thank you for that love. Thank you for the forgiveness. Thank you for your mercy, God, and thank you for your grace. It's in your Son's holy and awesome name we pray. Amen. Every week at Anthology, we take communion together, remembering just that. Like, that's what all of this points to. So on your chairs when you came in is a little Dixie cup, and inside that cup is a smaller package, prepackaged communion. And when you peel back that top layer, there's a little piece of bread, which is meant to remind us of Jesus' body. And when you peel back that second layer, there's a little cup of grape juice, which is meant to remind us of Jesus' blood. Every step we take toward Jesus, every effort we make to train for godliness is built on what he has already finished for us on the cross. There's nothing that we could do to earn right standing with God. It has everything to do with what Jesus did on the cross, and that's what we remember when we take communion together. And so what we're going to do is, if you're a follower of Jesus, when I finish up here, you can spend a couple moments in quiet prayer by yourself, and then you can take it whenever you're ready. If you're not a follower of Jesus, I'd encourage you to just let this moment pass. Like, don't take communion, but think about, like, what's holding you back from jumping in on following Jesus? I want you to know that there is a God who loves you and wants good for you. And that's what it looks like, right? That's what it looks like to run and follow after Jesus. And so the band's, once that's done, David's going to have us stand up. We're going to sing one more song to God to close out our service today. So let's do that as we take communion together right now.